not unusual for the mayor to be ahead of the council in negotiations before she brings it to them, but it probably would have been a smarter idea to bring at least Phil Mendelson into the room for a couple of meetings before you got to this point, to give him just one less thing to be upset about and complain about.
Story of the day is that the Commanders are headed back to RFK if City Council approves, but big ol' event this morning with the mayor, the commissioner of the NFL, and Josh Harris, amongst others. Mark Segraves was there, the NBC4 reporter, and he joins us now. Mark, thank you for your time, and welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Good to be here.
So let's start with your exchange with the mayor, because that was perhaps the most contentious part of the press conference. You asked about some of the budget in the money that is going to go to this in the context of the larger budgetary situation in the city right now. If you want to clean up that setup, by all means, go ahead. But I specifically would like to ask you, Mark, what did you make of her answer to that?
It's what I expected her to say, and it's the narrative that she has been driving for a couple weeks now, and that is the phrase shifting economy, that the district has long been an economy that has relied upon the federal government's presence here and all those jobs that go with it to sustain us. And now under the Trump administration, that is changing, and so the economy has to change, and the mayor wants it to, in her words, shift to a sports and entertainment-based economy, and that this development here, anchored by a stadium, is what will help drive that shifting economy, the new economy for Washington, D.C. But here's the reality of the numbers. The mayor today said that the district is prepared to put up more than $1.1 billion with a B dollars toward this project. Now, a lot of that will go to roads and underground water pipes and infrastructure and things that they most likely would have needed even if there wasn't a stadium here, and they're going to develop this 180 acres. But some of it is specific to the stadium, and it's $1.1 billion of D.C. taxpayer money that will go to this. At the same time, in the next week or two, the mayor is going to be announcing the possibility of furloughs of government employees, closing of government offices, the possible closure, temporary closures of some firehouses, the cuts of city services, because of a $400 million budget gap that has to be taken care of in the next 6 months. And then in the next year, in the next fiscal budget, there's another $350 million shortfall that they're going to have to make cuts to government programs. So at the same time, she is going to be dealing with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to essential services. We're talking about transportation, teachers, police, fire, homelessness, all of that. She's going to be talking about spending $1.1 billion to help develop not just the stadium, but the 180 acres around the RFK Stadium. And that's what I asked her. Is like, how do you rationalize that both to the residents and, more importantly, to the D.C. council members, who they're going to need 7 votes on the D.C. council to make this a reality? So when you said if the D.C. council passes this, that's a big if. And let's not forget what happened in Virginia. It wasn't too long ago. We were standing at a similar press conference with Glenn Youngkin and Ted Leonsis, and the Caps and Wizards were going to Virginia, right? And that was, the train had left the station, and they were going to build a new arena over there. And what happened? They forgot to engage the state legislature, and the state legislature shut it down. And now Caps and Wizards are here in D.C. to stay. And so it's the exact same scenario here. The mayor and the team went out, made this huge grand announcement, and they have not engaged with the D.C. council at all, or barely at all. And the council chairman put out a scathing statement to that effect already today. And so, it's going to be an uphill battle getting those 7 votes.
Mark Segraves, NBC4, with us. So part of the mayor's retort would be, we need to spend money to make money. She had this, was clearly a prepared political line of like, if you want to be about business, you got to, or whatever the business line was. You're like, oh, that's a bar. That's going to play well on social media. How much truth is there to it is really the question, though. Like, you do have to spend money to make money sometimes in business. You can't have return on investment without investment. But how valid is this if you talk to economists and the type of experts that would be able to tell us, Mark, how valid that is, and how does the timing work for the money on the front end, because you have to have the money to invest in the first place?
Yeah, so you're right. You do have to spend money to make money. And this, again, this development, I want to be absolutely as fair as I can to the mayor and the pro stadium people. This development is more than just a stadium. The stadium will take up about 15 acres. We're talking about 180 acres. There's going to be 70 acres. It's just going to be green space and parkland along the river. There's going to be thousands and thousands, as many as 6,000 housing units. There's going to be hotels, retail, restaurants, possibly a grocery store that's desperately needed in this neighborhood. So all that will come. And yes, it will be attracted to this area because of the presence of a stadium. And so she's right about that. But I'll tell you what, I could go out today and get an economist who will tell you, yeah, stadiums, they don't help the local economy as much as some other kind of investment. And I can find another economist who will say the exact opposite thing. You know, whatever I want them to say, you're going to find an economist who's going to say that. So there is truth that this will definitely spur development. I mean, look at Capital One Arena, right? And look how the merchants were terrified when at the thought of Capital One Arena moving out of downtown, what that would have done to their businesses. Look at what's happening down at the Navy Yard, around Nats Ballpark. You know, it definitely spurs economic development. There's no doubt about that. But what the flip side of that is, what opponents of the stadium will say is, yeah, well, that's 15 acres that could be used for affordable housing. That's 15 acres that could be used to put some kind of medical urgent care center there. That's 15 acres that could be used to put a school or a firehouse or other desperately needed things that this community wants. And so it's a balancing act. But, you know, there's a lot of pride in having these teams. And I will say, look, you guys are sports guys, right? So I'm preaching to the choir on this one. But having a city that has every major sports franchise located within a 10 square mile area in its jurisdiction, and every team having won a national championship, you know, in our lifetime, you know, is a great thing to have. And that's going to attract other things like conventions and businesses and a Super Bowl. We heard Roger Goodell, float the idea of a Super Bowl, Olympics, Final Four, all kinds of things that the city can attract. Taylor Swift, Beyonce, that they couldn't attract without this stadium. And so there's definitely an argument to be made that this will help, with that effort and create jobs at the same time.
Mark, my question, I guess, on that for the we've had like Andy Zimbalist and a couple of the other economists on the show who hate this stuff, or at least make the argument that stadiums are not the best use of space for cities on economic terms. And my question for that argument in this particular case is, would this land be unlocked if it wasn't for what the Commanders did and the NFL did on the lobbying front? And I don't ask that as a sports guy. I ask that as like a genuine question, because I think there's a chance that if the Commanders aren't involved here, that land is still just rotting. Like, it's 180 acres of unused land as opposed to the 15 acres that you have to dedicate from a stadium. Am I wrong on that?
Well, the whole 180 acres isn't completely unused. I'm looking at a DC Vault has a place here for their gymnasts to practice on this campus. There's a skate park that's right now being used by a bunch of kids right now. There's the fields at RFK, which supports youth soccer there. So there is use of the campus, but there's no tax being generated, right? There's no retail. There's no economy being generated on this site at all. And you're right. Look, the Commanders and the NFL, we know Roger Goodell himself and Josh Harris himself walked the halls of Congress, knocked on doors of members of Congress to get that legislation. And you saw the picture of Joe Biden signing the legislation with Mayor Bowser on one side, Josh Harris and Mark Ine on the other side. So, yes, they were absolutely pivotal in getting that legislation across the goal line. Would it have happened without their help? It's hard to say, but we know, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, the senator, Mayor Bowser acknowledged him by name today, is helping to get this deal done. And so you definitely had support from members of Congress. Representative Comer, who chairs the committee that oversees DC, spoke in favor of this and football. And look, members of Congress know. You get a football stadium right down the street from their office, guess who's going to get to go to a lot of football games, right? So they have a vested interest in that. And the NFL, I think, is located, if I'm not mistaken, in more than 25 states. So they have an in with members of Congress and Senate, in all these states. So they were very powerful. And Josh Harris and the NFL have helped the mayor lobby Congress on things outside of the stadium. They've used their muscle on this budget gap that Congress imposed upon them to try to get that fixed. So it is fair to say that without the help of the two teams, they may not have gotten the long-term control, which, as you said, opened the door to this development.
So if that is the case, I would also assume if I'm Josh Harris, I'm walking into Phil Mendelssohn and the other city council people's office and going, you're not really going to do this to me, are you? What other arguments need to be made to get city council to 7 votes that they will approve this plan?
It's really all about the dollars. It really is. The members of the council who oppose it, their biggest objection, particularly Phil Mendelssohn, is the use of public funds to build a stadium. That is what he has been absolutely opposed to. And that's why you see the mayor pointing to the fact that a lot of this money is going to what they call horizontal construction. So not vertical, not like buildings going up in the air like a stadium, but things like roads and underground water systems that need to be put in place, environmental assessments and transportation assessments. And some of these things would have had to been done regardless of whether a stadium was coming here, and may have had to have been paid by the district regardless of whether a stadium. If they're going to develop it, a lot of this work had to be done. So what they're going to be saying to Chairman Mendelssohn is the idea of how many jobs this is going to create, how much money this is going to bring into the economy, how fast it's going to, inject this money into the economy. I can tell you the mechanism that they're using to finance part of the district's portion of this is the old ballpark tax. This is a tax that they implemented on the top businesses in D.C. to build the Nats ballpark many, many years ago. And that's how they financed that. That tax was supposed to sunset and go away after they paid off that stadium. Well, they're just going to keep that in place. And that tax has been incredibly lucrative for the D.C. Council. Chairman Mendelssohn and the mayor have dipped into that account over the years when they've had budget problems to balance their books beyond just using it for the stadium. And so there is an upside for Chairman Mendelssohn to have a stadium tax in place that he can tap into down the road. But Mendelssohn put out a statement today. He was scathing because part of this deal, the contract, says that the D.C. Council has to vote by July of this year. That's a very, very short time for the council to go through committee and then go through public hearings and then have a full council vote to approve this in just a couple of months, with, in the chairman's words, without ever having been consulted so far on this. And so Mendelssohn is very upset. And I can tell you just, these personalities play into politics. And the fact that the mayor and the chairman don't have a great relationship, and now he's publicly saying how upset he is about this, is not going to make it any easier. But something tells me, sitting across the table from Josh Harris, who's a very likable, very persuasive guy, who clearly is invested in this city, right? He clearly wants to, if you believe him, if you take him at his word, he wants to do what's right for the city. And the one example that he has given is he went to Congress and lobbied on behalf of D.C. government for the D.C. government budget. Had nothing to do with the stadium, but he felt he had that opportunity. He has those connections. He used his connections to help the district, and that's something that he can point to Phil Mendelssohn, where he can be a very good corporate citizen if he comes to D.C.
Mark Segraves from NBC4 is with us here on the Hoffman Show discussing the news of the day. The Commanders have reached a deal with Mayor Bowser's office to return to RFK. D.C. City Council approval is still the final step here. Mark, actually, one more question on the council side of this. As you mentioned, there's a lot of personalities here, and two main personalities in Bowser and Mendelssohn who don't particularly get along. that well. And so I don't want to say you take what either of them says with a grain of salt, but perhaps it's not as extreme as either side likes to say at all times. So when Mendelsohn says, I haven't been consulted at all, when there's all this information in the public record, not to mention, I'm sure there had to have been some small levels of conversation at some point along the way. Like, how much do you buy the substantive nature of what he's saying versus the posturing of what he's saying?
There's a little posturing there, right? I mean, look, the mayor cuts deals and negotiates with businesses and all kinds of entities all the time without consulting with the chairman or the D.C. council. That said, as they said over and over again, this is the biggest private investment in the district in the history of this city. And they know that it's going to rely upon the support of the D.C. council. And again, I would just point back to Virginia. It's the perfect comparison. The fact that Governor Youngkin took for granted the Virginia state legislature, Ted Leonsis believed Youngkin could get it across the finish line with them, and then they found out that, in fact, they couldn't, and that they hit a roadblock because of personalities, because the woman in charge of the committee who that had to go through felt slighted, that nobody had bothered to pick up the phone or meet with her before they even made the announcement. And you know, she just wanted some concessions on tolls in her jurisdiction, and it just never got done. So there's some truth to it. There's some posturing about it. But again, not unusual for the mayor to be ahead of the council in negotiations before she brings it to them. But it probably would have been a smarter idea to bring at least Phil Mendelsohn into the room for a couple of meetings before you got to this point, to give him just one less thing to be upset about and complain about. But that's not what's going to kill this deal. What really stands in the way of this deal is the money, is how much money they're willing to spend at a time. Again, this couldn't come at a worse time for the mayor fiscally, because she's facing just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in budget shortfalls, some of which are no fault of the district governments. They were imposed by Congress. Some of them are a result of I'll use the mayor's term, the shifting economy and the dwindling federal workforce in D.C. So, but, you know, they're going to need 7 votes. They only had 4 council members at this press conference today. That means they need to sway 3 more votes.
Mark Segraves with us. I got one more question for you, Mark. I just will quickly note, though, in talking to some of the Monumental folks, I don't know by the end of this thing and the aftermath and doing some more recon there, I don't know they actually wanted to go to Virginia. I also wonder how much of that was leverage. So I do think that, like, Josh Harris and company are very serious about D.C., obviously. So I do hope and very much think there will be a different level of work than was put in. And I also think the politicians at play here are perhaps a little more grounded in reality than some of the stuff that was happening in Virginia. But we can talk about that another time. Last question for you, Mark. You broke this story that this was going to happen a couple of weeks ago. You got your hands on some documents and did some great reporting about it then. Is there anything else now that you learned today, this morning, that you think is worth noting that's different or answers a key question that you had left after your initial reporting a couple of weeks ago?
Well, certainly we know the actual dollar amounts are even higher than the dollar amounts that I first reported 2 weeks ago. And so that was new information. We also know that the NFL is going to kick in about $400 million. So when the team says that they're kicking in $2.7 billion, some of that money, as much as $400 million of it, actually comes from the other owners. This is part of the deal the NFL makes about supporting one another, helping each other build stadiums. And so not all of that $2.7 billion comes from Josh Harris. About $400 million will come from the NFL. And then the idea of, you know, they confirmed today it's going to be a dome. We don't know what it's going to look like, if it's going to be retractable. And I think just based on all of anytime JP Finley tweets something about me on this story, and you know, half the comments come up about the name, and then another half of the comments come up about tailgating. We found out today there will be surface parking, at least in the first few years, and that will allow for tailgating at these games, at least in the short term, before they build the bigger parking structures. So I think for people who are looking forward to tailgating, they will get their wish. There will be some surface lots available for tailgating. And then the other big question about the name, That came up again today in the briefing, and the president of the team reiterated what Josh Harris has said. There are no plans to go back to the old name. The Commanders is the name of the team, and that's how they're going forward.
Mark Segraves, you can catch him actually in about 5 minutes on NBC4, and he'll obviously be covering this over not just the rest of the night on their newscast, but as the story continues to develop moving forward. Mark, appreciate your time. It's always great to have you on the radio, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
Hey, I always hear from a lot of people when I'm on your station, so I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks.
Absolutely. It is our pleasure. Mark Segraves with us here on The Hoffman Show. And just to circle back to the monumental point real quick, that was a mess. It was extremely poorly done in a lot of ways. But there's also some stuff on the monumental side where I think they were very sloppily making a leverage play, and they might have been willing to take the political hit in the short term to get what they wanted from DC in the long term, because they had no leverage on the district unless they were willing to leave. And I think that is a different situation than the one that Josh Harris is currently in, where Mayor Bowser desperately wants the Commanders back to RFK. That is, there's a lot of other things she cares about. But in terms of her legacy, I think if you could inject truth serum into Muriel Bowser and say, what's your number one legacy project that you could leave? I think if she could say, name 5, certainly it's on a list of 5, bringing the Commanders back to DC. And so knowing that, while also knowing she's balancing the political realities of her budget and what the council will approve. But I think if it was up to Mayor Bowser, if the public money had to be there, she'd be like, sure, we'll figure it out. Politically, that would be disastrous for her. And her job is ultimately to represent the people that elected her, and the people of the city don't want to do that. And the council is a great check on that to make sure she can't just go, well, I don't care what the money is. And so they're working together to figure that out. But I do think the two situations are very different. I do think it is also very much, to Mark's point, worth pointing out that this is not done. That there were 4 city council members there today. You need 7. And Phil Mendelson was actually on Grant and Danny earlier today. And so we can get you some of what he said about this as well, as we try to, where are they? On the 20, on the 5? Are they on the 2-yard line? And all we need is a tush push. And we'll see if Jaden Daniels can do it. We'll figure that stuff out over the next couple of weeks here, as Mark said, between now and July. But we can get you the state of play for certain next. Pick 6 and 6 style. You'll hear from Bowser. You'll hear from Goodell. You'll hear from Josh Harris. And we'll see if we can get you something from what Phil Mendelson had to say as well, as we are your home for all coverage of all things Commanders, including where they're going to play starting in 2030. We're Pick 6ing at 6 next on the Team 980.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.